So ES8, which was released in 2017. So ES8 has some more new features that were introduced in 2017 compared to ES7. So in this section, we'll just go over the important ones. So the very first one I'll be talking about is string padding. Though ever since I've never ever used this, but then it's something you need to know so that probably you come across this in the wild, it won't be looking strange to you like, which one is padding again? I thought padding is we can only use padding in CSS, so why JavaScript? But then you need to know this. Probably you can come across this, but trust me, I've never ever seen this in any code. But then you need to know it. So we have new methods that we can add to string, which is we have the .padStart, we have the .padStart, and we have the .padEnd. That's interesting. So to introduce this, let's just write some code. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to comment this out. Okay. So let's say I have a string, and the string is my name, which is read1. So what if I do .padStart and let's do 10. Yeah. So I will explain what this is doing. So if I do this now and I run, let's see what we are going to get. You see that I have, okay, let's do this. Let me just console.log read1. Console.log read1. Then let me write padding starts because this. Then I console.log that out so that we can see the difference. Console.log padding starts. So if I do this now, if I run this code, let's see what we are going to get. You see that there is a kind of difference. We have read1, which is just me printing out the string read1. Then we have this padding starts, which has the string read1. Okay, let's do it this way. Let's do let name equals read1. Let name equals read1. And here I'm console.logging name. And here I'm saying name dot padStart. So if I run this again, we get the same result. So the first one is just console.logging the string out, which is read1. The second one is console.logging this padding starts. And we have, if you notice, we have some spaces behind this. So I get this back, which is read1 with 10 total spaces, including the string. So if we count this now, we have read1 as how many letters there? That is 6. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's a total of 10. So it added some spaces at the left of this string. So this string already is what? 6 characters. So, and we are saying it should have a padding of 10. So the total padding, the total spaces here is 10. So 6 out of 10, remaining 4 is going to add the remaining 4 spaces here. So that is that. And I can also do, let's padEnd for padEnd equals name dot padEnd. So let's do how many spaces? Let's do 10. Let's do 10 too. So don't worry too much about this, but sometimes it's something you can actually come across out there. So in case you come across this, it won't look strange and you won't be like, which one is this again? So that is why we need to touch most of these things, just in case or probably you went for an interview and they ask you like, what is this? Because you don't know. You can't say this is the kind of question an interviewer is going to ask. So it's just for us to get prepared, just in case. So if I run this now.
Hello, sorry, just a question.
Okay.
That padStart and padEnd, are they the function?
We call them methods.
Oh, okay, they're rather methods.
Yes, they are methods.
The reason I'm asking the question, like the first one is padStart. I was wondering maybe the second one should be also be padEnd. But when I'm not seeing padEnd,
I made a mistake, you know. Sometimes it's kind of, it might not be easier talking, typing, and all those things.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay.
I've corrected it.
Okay. All right.
So
thanks.
you're welcome. Thanks for that. So if I run this now, you see that I have this. So the first one is just my name, a string. The second one is this with some padding at the back. And the third one is this with some padding in front of it. You can see that. So, you know, what can I say? It's just a way of adding some characters, like some spaces to the characters. So we can also do, there is something we can also do this. Let me show us this. Let's say we have a string of loading, which you might see in some, what was it called? In some applications. Then they can do something like this. They can say, okay, the total padding should be 10. Then I want you to add this instead of just spaces. So if I do this now and I run this, oops, let me comment out these ones. So let me just comment out these ones. So what can we do? Okay, let's loading equals loading dots this, then console the log. So let's see what we get. We got this. So you remember, like before, if I didn't have this, we are just going to get spaces in front of that. So if I run this now, we got loading, but then we have some spaces doing nothing. So you can use the second parameter to add whatever you want. So yeah, I'm adding dots. Imagine I can add my name. Let's add read one. So if I add this now, you see loading, then we see read. Why is this? Because I'm saying like this is 10. So that means the total number of maybe spaces plus strings here should be 10. So we have loading to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So when it reaches 10, it's just like a boundary, it will stop. So if I put 20 there, let's see what we have. So I put 20. If I reload, you see that we have loading, then we have read one, then read one, then R. So the total number of characters there is 20. So that is why I did something the other time. If I do loading, then I'm okay. Instead of just white spaces, then have dots in front. So if I do this now, I have loading. So the total number of these dots plus this should be 10. So if you count it, it's going to be 10. So that is the first thing that ES8, which is ECMAScript 2017, introduced. So now let's go to the second one. The second thing that ECMAScript 2017 introduced is called trailing comma. Oops, before I comment that out, let's write it out so that we can see. Trailing comma. Let me say trailing commas. So how does this work? You know, the trailing commas is something that can be used in functions, in function parameter list and calls. And what does that mean? Let's say I have something like this. If I do const, let's say I want to have a function which is fun and it accepts A, B, C, D, E, or ABCD as parameter. Then this is console.logging. Let's console.log one of these, which is console.log whatever we have in A. So this trailing comma is something like this. Like, you know that we have our parameters here and everything ends. We don't have to add anything else in case we don't have anything else to add. So we can add this last comma here. And why is this? I will explain. So one of the things they introduce is you adding the trailing comma at the end of the parameters. So I can run something like this now. Like fun, I can say 1A should be 1, B should be 2, C should be 3, and D should be 4. Then adding the comma. So if I run this now, it's going to console.log whatever I give to it, which is 1, which is A. So if I console.log D, and that should give me 4. But what we are interested here is what? This last comma. What is it doing there? So if you do it like this is still valid in JavaScript. And you can see that when I run it, I got whatever I want to log into the console. So why is this useful at all? Like, why should you have this? The main reason is when you start getting really big parameters, you know, let's say you have a list of parameters and we have A, B, C, D to maybe Z. Then you have maybe Z1. Just imagine we have Z1 to Z100 to Z1000, then A100, you know, those things. So when you start getting really big parameters, like really big parameters list, you see a lot of people, you know, doing this, something similar to something like this. You probably come across this in some of the code bases. So I wish I could be using VSC, but I just prefer to have everything in the same, what's it called, in the same window, having my code here, then my output here. So I don't want to be switching from browser to console. So this is just to make things a little bit cleaner. And when you start doing this, every time you add a new parameter, you know, it's a lot easy. So I can just come here now, add another parameter. So I can come here, add another parameter. So it makes your code looks nicer and easier. And also when you start pushing your code to GitHub, you know, when you start making changes, it's going to make a huge difference. Because when you put your code to GitHub, GitHub is going to show some codes in green and some code in red, you know, then you'll be able to like understand what is happening in your code. So it's just a syntactic sugar. And just to make things look a little bit nicer. Again, you normally, you know, you wouldn't want to do something like this. But maybe when you have a long parameter list, like, you know, very huge, then the ending comma is now valid for you to use. Though it won't give any error. If you don't use it, it won't give any error. You know, it's just like you having something. So nothing too serious about the trailing commas. So that is that about the trailing comma. So let's look at the next one. So the next one that ES8, which is ECMAScript 2017 introduced, is Object.values and Object.entries. Oops, let's add this here. Okay. And these are very, very useful because before these two, these guys, let me just delete the hand so that you know that it's not there. So before these two guys, we had something called object.keys. And I think we used it the last time when we were talking about our pass by reference. So we have this object.keys that we used before. And object.keys allowed us to do something similar to, you know, arrays, but on objects. So for example, if we have an object, let's say we have, let me just write that, I will still comment them out. Let's say we have an object, sorry. Let's say let object equals, we have an object here. And inside this object, let's say we have username. For the first username, we have, let's say we have, who can we have? We have Ben. So here we have Ben, and the second username, which is username 1. Oops. We have, who else can we have on our username list? We have Ogugua. So we have Ogugua, and the third person inside this object has a username of, this is going to be 2. Oops. So who else can we have there? We have Ibrahim. So we have Ibrahim here. So now looking at these objects, you know that this is not an array, you know, and we can't do something like, if you want to loop through these objects, this is an object, not an array. So if you want to loop through this, looping through each properties and values inside this object, you know, if it were to be an array, we can do something like object.map or object.filter, .reduce. We can use for each. You can even do looping, like for loop on it, if it were to be an array. But this is not an array. This is an object. So how do we loop through this data inside this object? And you know, this is going to illustrate a good point, because sometimes when you are working with servers, you will get objects that you don't really like. You don't, you know, they are not well structured and you don't want to work with. But you still have to like iterate over them because you need those data. So if you want to iterate over this, before we could do something with object.keys. So I'm going to show us how we can do this with object.keys, iterating over the information inside an object, and these new guys that ES8 introduced, how we can use them, you know. So if you are to do this with object.keys, how do we do that? So I'm going to show us now. Then I'll show us the new ways that these guys introduce. So before, we could do something like objects dot keys. You see that? Then I'll pass in the object that I want to, you know, loop over. Don't worry, I'll be using the word loop and iterate, but actually iteration is actually meant for arrays. Then for objects, there is a different word for that. But for now, I'm going to be using the word so that we understand what we are actually trying to do. So I can look through this object just like an array and iterate over the items one by one, just like an array. So it's as if it's an array, but it's not an array, it's an object. So except that, you know, arrays don't have properties and values. Array have a list of items or a list of things or array of things. So, but this is an object with property and value, property and value, property and value. So let's say we want to do for each on this. How do we do that? Well, using this now, I have converted this to an array. Let me say an array. So we can just do, let's do console.log. Let's see what we are going to get. Console.log objects.keys, then passing the object. So if I run this now, let's see what we are going to get. You can see that. How interesting. So we have, you can see the square brackets. So it's converted this to an array, converted the keys, or let me say the properties. So which are these and this and this. The things on the right are called the values. So here we have the properties or the key. Then here we have the values. So it's converted this to an array for me. So now I can perform array operations on them. So let's say I want to look through them. I can say dot for each now. Then, you know, I can say for each key, which is, we have the usernames, the first key, the second key, the third key. So for each key, so, and each key has an index of, this is index of 0, index of 1, index of 2. So we can also pass the index here as a parameter. So take the key and their index, and we can actually wrap this in a bracket because it's more than one parameter, just so it looks way nicer. And now, within here, I can say, I can say for each key, take the key and the index, then let's just console.log to the console so that we see what we are getting. So let's console.log the key that we are getting and also the object.key. So what we are doing here is we are grabbing the objects with the key username, and let's just run it. Let's see what we have. So if I run this now, you see that I console.log the key, then each object with the key. So this object.key here is the same thing as saying the object, and you know that if you want to access I'm using bracket notation here. There are two ways to access items in an object. The first thing is I can do something like dot notation, which is object.username. I can do object.username. So I am accessing, okay, let's do it this way. Let me just comment out this. So if I do, let me console.log this. There are two ways to access information inside an object. There is just one way to access information inside an array. So the two ways inside an object is, the first one is dot notation. So let's just do this. Dot notation. The second way, so if I do this now, if I run this, I'm getting dot notation for Ben. So let me just write this so that we see what we are getting out. So if I run this now, this is dot notation, and I can use bracket notation. So how do we do that? So let's do bracket notation, then out this. So I can do something like this, square brackets, then username 0, the first one. So these are the two ways. Oops, it's not defined. Is it right? Okay. Let me use one. I don't know, maybe I misspelled something. It's not defined. Something is wrong. But don't worry, I will explain that, and so because these are just the two ways to access things in JavaScript. It's something we can actually read about, then we can see what is actually going on. But in JavaScript, you can access things based on the dot notation and the bracket notation. So I will see to that and I will check what is actually going on with this. So don't worry, before we end the class, I will go back to this, then I will use it to explain some things. So for now, let me just, okay. Oh, sorry. I think I know where the problem is. If you are using bracket notation, then this has to be a string. I'm actually passing in a variable, which is wrong. So let's see this now. Oh, wow. So it is one of those things. So you can access objects inside, you can access information or data inside an object with dot notation. This is dot notation, then with bracket notation, but you have to make sure it is a string unless you have a variable declared that you want to like use and to perform whatever operation. So here we are using bracket notation. This is bracket notation, and we are using this to access. So if I want to access Ibrahim here, I will do username as a string, then I'll pass it and I'll check. So what am I getting? I got Ibrahim back. So that is that. I just want to use this to explain some things. So what are we doing here? Here we are saying that object.keys, grab the objects, then convert it to an array, convert the keys, which are username, username 1, username 0, username 2, convert this into an array. And once we convert it to an array, then we can perform any array operation on that. So for each item inside that converted array, take the key, which is the username O, username 1, username 2, for each one of them, then take the key and the index. And we know that for arrays, we have index starting from 0, 1, 2. And since we have 3 items here, definitely we have 0, 1, so as the indexes. So take the index, then console.log the key, which is username 0 for the first time, then objects dot and the key, then console.log it out, which is what we have here. So for each item, it takes the key, then the object with brackets notation of the key, username, the key, the object or key, and the like. So, so that is what we have here. We have the username and the name. And that is one way for us to iterate or loop through objects. So I'm just showing us what we had before, which is object or keys. But ES8 introduces these new guys, Object.values and Object.entries. So these guys came just to make things become a little bit easier. For example, we can do something like, so I'm just going to comment this out for now. So for example, we can do something like objects dot values, then you pass in the objects that you want to like operate on as a parameter. Then for each, then take the value, and you can actually call this value any name. I can call it read1. So I'm just saying like this name is going to represent each item inside that array. Then take the value, then let's console.log the value and let's see what we have. Console.log the value. So if I console.log, if I run this now, let's see what we have. We have the values, Ben, Ogugwa, Ibrahim. I can call this any name, like I said. So if I call this read1, just make sure you're operating on that particular word. So this is just representing each item. So if I run this now, I am going to get the same thing. You see that? But let me just return it back to value so that it is kind of descriptive and we can understand what is actually going on. So I get the value of each object, and that's it. It loops through Ben, Ogugwa, Ibrahim, and with that is for values. With entries, let me just take this down so that we can see. With entries, we can do something like objects dot entries. Oops, come on. Object dot entries. And what this entry do is it turns an object attribute to an array of attributes. So you see the difference between the values, object of values, and object dot entries. So you are going to pass in the particular object you want to work on. Then let's just use for each again. For each, so I'm also going to use value. For each value, let's console.log this out and see the difference between the two. So if I console.log value out here, should we use value so that I can be Oops. Okay, let's use, should we use value? Objects, object items, so that it's kind of descriptive. Object item, so that we know what we are getting. I don't want to be using values. So let's see this. You see that, you know, this is returning arrays of each of these. So the first item has an array of this and this. The second one has an array of username and Ogugua. The third one has an array of username 2 and Ibrahim. So this gives you a lot of control, you know, because you get both the property and the value, or let's say the key and the value in an array. And you can do whatever you want with it. You can use for each like we did here. You can use map, you can use reduce, you can use filter. And you can use all other array methods. So let's use a real life scenario to do an example. Let's say we received this particular object from the backend, and the backend just send us a bunch of users that they have in the database, and we want to generate usernames for them because we don't like the way they wrote this, like username 0. It doesn't really make sense. We want each one of them to have a username, let's say Ben, and the username for Ben should be maybe Ben 0, Ben 1, Google 1, Ibrahim 2, you know, just like that. So we want it to be displayed differently. It's just like we are trying to manipulate the data here. So how can we do that? You know, using our newly found powers. Well, we can just do something like, so let me just comment this out. I won't delete it so that we can have a reference to that. So we can do something like objects, object.entries, and I'll pass it whatever object I'm receiving from the backend. So this is just an array. Then I can use .map on it. Then for each, okay, I'm mapping through this. So on each item, let's return something back. So let's return value. Let's see what we have here. So let's return value back and let's see what we get. So we got an array of this. So let's see what we have in the the second index, which is index of 1. So I should get, you see that. Let me go back because I know it might be kind of confusing. So if I do this now, you know, I got this, which is username Ben, this, but then I want to get their names, which is Ben, Ogugua, Ibrahim in an array. So how do we do that? So you know that we have, this is of index 0, index 1, index 0, index 1, index 0, index 1. So what I can do now is I can say, so I just want to get their names without that username 0, 1. You see that I got Ogugua, Ben, Ibrahim. And you know, this just return an array. Here we just return a value of 1 because we want to grab their names. So that is, you know, 1 is just the second item in the arrays. And then we want to add something to that, to these names, because we want to replace this username with just something we can have Ben 0, we can have Ogugua 1 and those. You can actually perform any operation, but I'm just using this as an example. So, you know, we can actually do something like this. So we can say value plus value 0, which is the first value. So if I do this now, let's see what we get. We're going to get Ben username O. You see that? But we don't want this. We don't want this username to show. What we want is, we want this 0 to be there. So all we want is Ben 0, Ogugua 1, Ibrahim 2. We want it to remove this username. So how do we do that? There is a method in JavaScript called replace. So we are going to be using that replace. So we are going to be replacing these username word with empty strings, nothing. So how do we do that? So within here, we can do something like dot replace. Oops. Replace. You do not spell. Replace. And here, we are going to pass into parameters. The first thing is what we want to replace. So I can say replace username. So anywhere you see username, replace it. And with what? Replace it with, let's say, let me just use this for example. Replace it with read one. So if I do this now and we run, we should see Ben read one, Ogugua read one, Ibrahim read one. So this is still running. So while that is still running, I think that is new to my network. So I might even go back to use the console now. So sometimes I think, okay, you see that now. We have Ben read one O, Ogugua read one 1, Ibrahim read one 2. So what we want to get rid is, we want to get rid of the particular text here and make the 0 come. So what we are going to do is, we are going to say, replace wherever you have username with an empty string. So if I run this now, we should get something else. You see that we get Ben 0, Ogugua 1, Ibrahim 2. How cool is that? You know, so these are really, really useful additions to the language, especially Object.values and Object.entries. So you can do a lot of things with them, but there is one big ES8 feature that makes everybody excited, you know, and that is called async await. Async await. This is very, very interesting. So in 2017, when they introduced the ES8, you know, it was brand new and everybody in the community were really, really excited about it. However, in order to fully understand what async await is and understand the benefits and how to use it, we actually need an entire section on its own for this. Because trust me, if you want to call yourself a front-end developer, you must, you know, be able to work with asynchronous programming, asynchronous functions. You know, you, for example, you launch WhatsApp and your user, or you are the user, you launch WhatsApp and you are offline, you put off your data. Then you know that WhatsApp is not going to get anything. It's just there. Once you on your data, WhatsApp is going to connect to the server and get, if you have past messages, if you have any messages from someone while you are offline, it's going to get them and you are going to get them real time. So with this async await, it gives you that power to connect with the, you know, you having your app and you connecting with the server to get new data while, you know, the data you have presently in your app is not, you know, don't worry, when we get to that section, it's going to be very, very interesting and we are going to really, really learn something cool, something interesting about that. So to wrap it up for today, we'll be talking about the last thing today, which is advanced. Let me just